Hello and welcome to the Ideas Factory. What were the main issues really during the American election?
People were unhappy with the status quo. I think majority believed that the country was going in the wrong direction. Kamala Harris was seen as an agent of continuity. She could not draw a red line between her and the Biden administration. She tried, but she failed.
Elon Musk, for example,
Yes.
Vivek Ramaswamy, and what is this DOGE?
I do think that you have some establishment figures, Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio. I think in terms of foreign policy and in terms of security, I think that gives you some confidence that I think there is a core of an argument here that perhaps will be sustained, and in that sense, strong anti-China voices in the administration
Absolutely.
are quite visible. Before Trump and after Trump, I think you do see a discontinuity in Western approach to China, and there his role has been quite significant. Elon Musk has strong incentives to be on the good side of China, but I don't think Mr. Trump's concern is that.
Hello and welcome to the Ideas Factory. I'm Nakma. Joining me is Professor Harsh Pant. Two very important topics that we will be talking about and analyzing on this episode is the American election and the Russia-Ukraine war. The conflict there seems to be more fierce than ever. The escalation of the conflict. What does that mean, and how will the new American regime tackle it? All these things that are still being discussed, and the impact of the Donald Trump regime or the challenges that the new regime will face in controlling this war. But before that, let's look at Donald Trump and his new cabinet that is taking shape. Things are still in a flux, but more or less it gives an indication of what the new cabinet is going to be like. And if it is, if I may call it anything, it can be a disruptive cabinet of the establishment that is there right now in America. And there seems to be a lot of worry about this new cabinet taking shape, Harsh. First of all, let's go back to the election. Trump won. There was a lot of right noise about Kamala Harris, but still Trump even won the popular vote. What are the factors that you see that contributed to his victory?
Hi, Nagma. I think this has been a remarkable election for a president to come back in this way. An ex-president to become president-elect once again after a term in between in itself is historic, I think. And the way he has won across all demographies except one, which is the college-going graduates, I think he has had a lead. He has won as you were mentioning, popular vote as well as the electoral college numbers. So it's been a big victory for him, and it has been a big victory for the Republicans because now they have control of the trifecta of White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. So in that sense, it has been a coming back of the Republicans and of course of Mr. Trump, because
In a big way.
I think Republicans rode on the coattails of Trump this time. Unlike last time when perhaps no one was sure, and Trump included, that they would win against Hillary Clinton. This time I think he was sure, but I think many people and many analyses were telling us that it's going to be a very close fight. It turned out that it was not that close. He won all the battleground states.
But the changing of the candidate in the middle of the election,
it was a difficult, I think, struggle for Kamala Harris. I think she came very late, and the whole disjuncture between the base of the Democratic Party and Biden himself not wanting to go for a long time, I think that did create a space. But if you look at the numbers, if you look at the undercurrent, if you look at the factors that we are now talking about in terms of our analysis of what perhaps went wrong for the Democrats, you can see that there are underlying structural changes that are happening in the American society that I think Mr. Trump was able to tap into. And the Democrats really have no vocabulary to talk to a large constituency in the country.
So would you say that there's a big disconnect that the Democrats are facing right now with the masses?
Absolutely. And I think the hinterland is completely gone. If you look at how the battleground states, for example, went one way across the board, it tells you that it's this combination of economic anxiety, and cultural grievances, and plus this sense of elite condescension. I think a large part of America, working class America, feels that the elites have been condescending to them in ways that perhaps we may find very difficult to comprehend. But I think on the ground, certainly there is a disconnect between those who are going to colleges and the vast majority of Americans who are not. And I think that perhaps is what you find interesting now in America, that is becoming a topic of conversation, how these Ivy League colleges are creating a divide within America, which is becoming very, very difficult to be bridged by political parties, and in particular Democrats.
There's a huge class divide that we see there.
Absolutely, and that is growing. And I think the Democrats have not been able to tap into that concern, both because I think they are seen as perhaps those, along with the Republican elites, of course, who deregulated the economy, who who ensured that the jobs are going overseas, offshoring is happening. So I think what we were talking in the last Trump mandate in 2016, the Rust Belt, which vociferously voted for Mr. Trump and said that Middle America is being lost by the Democrats. But I don't think the Democrats learned. There was Mr. Biden in between, but I don't think that learning happened, and that resulted in this very big defeat for the Democrats. Now, how far it sustains itself, of course, would depend on Trump's performance.
Yes.
But I do think that that the changes that are happening, when you see working class, which used to be the preserve or the electoral vote bank almost of the Democrats right from the time of the New Deal, today is deserting themselves, and even the immigrants, new immigrants like Hispanics, even Asians, you see a lot of them voting for Trump, which tells you that there is, I think, a fundamental structural change that is happening within the American society, which the Democrats will have to tap into, or at least find a way to talk about. Because at the moment, the issues that they are talking about perhaps are not resonating with the masses.
For example, the immigrant problem or the abortion rights. So all these things, the Democrats probably were making the right noises, everything that was politically correct. And their main plank was being condescending towards Trump. But that did not seem to work. And his voters were not affected by these things. So what were the main issues, really, during the American election?
I think, of course, if you look at the data, polling data, people were unhappy with the status quo. So that was, I think, majority believed that the country was going in the wrong direction, which is a very basic trend that people identify with. It can be because of economic reasons, it can be because of cultural reasons, political reasons, whatever. But when they were not very satisfied with Mr. Biden, I think it was very clear that they were going to vote against against anyone who does not represent change. And in some ways, Trump, despite being in office 4 years back, could appeal to that sense of change, that I will bring that change. Whereas Kamala Harris was seen as an agent of continuity. So she could not make a successful argument about that she can be the agent of change. And I think that became a problem because she could not draw a red line between her and the Biden administration. She tried, but she failed. But Trump, again, despite being there in office, he could make an argument that, look, I can be this disruptor. I can take you out of this morass which you are facing, economic, cultural, political. And I think all of these factors together brought about, in some ways, the sense that perhaps he is the best candidate at this point for most Americans. Not for all, of course. It's a divided country. But even in that, if popular vote, there's 0.5%. I think Trump has won, which is more than Kamala Harris. But it tells you that the country, though it is divided, the way the electoral college is structured, and again, the battleground states where there was a lot of debate that this is a very closely contested election and both are fighting neck to neck, that didn't turn out. And I think in the end, Mr. Trump won on the basis of a number of arguments that he continued to make, and Kamala Harris just simply was unable to make.
Yeah, he stuck to his points, even though he sounded wrong, but wrong to us and wrong to the popular perception of what things should be, whether it's about illegal immigrants, whether it's about the abortions, whether it was about women or gender rights. He just appeared to be saying the wrong thing, but then still we see the kind of votes he gets. Now, there's a major shake-up that we see in the establishment, Harsh, and he's being seen as a disruptor, and this time he's actually he's hell-bent to change everything, the establishment that was there in America, the bureaucracy, so that, last time he had a difficult time dealing with them. So how do you see that? There are two Fox News people, there are TV anchors who are in his cabinet, and people who he has brought in from various places. There is no racial or gender diversity still, but diverse people who've had no say in the establishment earlier.
I think, again, he seems to be appealing, and he seems to have been strengthened in his belief that perhaps disruption is what people want, because he has always campaigned on this idea that I'm the great disruptor, and I can disrupt this elite, supremacy over the political and social order. And in some ways, though he himself is an elite, he could make that argument perhaps more convincingly than the other elite, which is Kamala Harris. But I think, unlike the first Trump administration, where he himself did not realize that he would win, he suddenly won, and then he was left to bring back all the Republican grandees, old men of the Republican Party, to help him in administration. Of course, by the end of his administration, he had annoyed most of them. But this time, I think he's much more convinced that he will bring his own men, and loyalty seems to have become the most important factor, that those who stuck by him throughout the various challenges that he faced for the last 4 years, I think he believes that he needs to help
Get
them.
those people,
Exactly.
like Elon Musk, for example,
Yes.
Vivek Ramaswamy. And what is this DOGE?
Yes, I think this idea that state, the bureaucracy is too big and we need to be more efficient and cut down bureaucracy. There's a lot of apprehensions in the American bureaucracy about what he's going to do. But certainly, I think that's an agenda that he has come to office with, and he would fulfill it. And I think he feels that he has the mandate now, given the kind of support that he would have in the Congress. So I do think that a number of figures are disruptors in their own ways, people who have had very interesting things to say about various things. So you have had the Kennedy Jr. saying things about vaccines, not being supportive of the vaccines, now being put in charge of health, and you have, as you were mentioning, characters like Pete Hegseth, for example, Secretary of Defense, who again very controversial in his own ways in speaking about how American defense should look like. But I do think that you have some establishment figures, if you can call them, Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio. I think, and in terms of foreign policy and in terms of security, I think that gives you some confidence that I think there is a core of an argument here that perhaps will be sustained, and in that sense, strong anti-China voices in the administration are quite visible.
Mm-hmm. So that's another question I would want you to expand upon. Of course, there is disruption, and we see him bringing his own loyal men there, but also in terms of the Indian American origin people in his cabinet, and for example, Mark Rubio, who has been a great vocal supporter of India, but very strong voice against China, against Iran. So if we look at it from the India perspective and China perspective, how do you see his cabinet shaping up? Of course, things will be finalized later, but what it looks like now to his China policy?
I think China, it looks that he will continue to, because he has made that case throughout, that look, China is the big problem. And I think on China, you have to give him credit. In the first term, he changed the very discourse on China in the West. Before Trump and after Trump, I think you do see a discontinuity in the Western approach to China. And there, his role has been quite significant. So now in his second term, I think he wants to take it forward. And Biden, of course, also took the first Trump administration's policies on China forward, and in fact accelerated them by putting more tariffs on China. So now when he's saying that, look, it will be huge tariffs, 60%, I think he has said, on China across the board. So clearly there is a sense that strong anti-China voices will be there and will be part of the administration to take forward this conversation. But with Mr. Trump, you also are always at the back of your mind thinking that the art of the deal. How can he cut a deal? Because he's a deal maker. He believes that he can cut deals with strong leaders, so. In some ways, you might also see this as positioning as the first salvo in a long, negotiating strategy. Yeah. That this is my maximalist position. I'm going to bring in these very strong anti-China voices, put them on the table, see how far China goes, what kind of a deal we can make, which is good for us. And I think perhaps that's the argument we will see getting operationalized over the next few months. But broadly, I think on India, certainly it looks to be relatively stable, given the kind of people that we were discussing, whether it's Rubio or Mike Walls, which has been the head of the India caucus, etc. And then you have Tulsi Gabbard and others.
Indians seem to be quite happy.
Vivek Ramaswamy. So I think there is a fair degree of representation, and there is a fair degree of those who view India in a very positive light. But again, whether it results in a policy dynamic which helps India, that remains to be seen. Because again, India will be under pressure on trade. India will be under pressure on immigration. India will be also under pressure on, on technology transfers. And nothing is going to come easy. You'll have to negotiate every single bit. So how well we negotiate, I think it's up to us. But one final point, which is Elon Musk. Musk has strong incentives to be on the good side of China. So, and I think that's going to be very interesting, because he is a very powerful figure now, seemingly in Donald Trump's administration. So, with all the anti-China rhetoric, what kind of pragmatism would Mr. Musk bring to the table when it comes to China? That I think would be a very important and interesting question to watch out for.
And it's a very interesting time. There are, I've seen a lot of people even leaving X, the social media platform, as an anti-voice in a protest of Elon Musk and joining something else. So all these things are going on. But let's look at Russia now. The Russia-Ukraine war, after 1,000 days of the war, looks more fierce, and there has been escalation in the tension. Now, with this Trump regime coming in, how do you think this will play out? There's still some time before he takes the oath. But right now, US being more aggressive and the ballistic missiles being fired, Russia changing its nuclear doctrine, and now threatening even the UK that it's going to fire a missile on the UK. This tension or this war is worse than ever.
I think the escalation that has happened is partly because of Mr. Trump, because every protagonist in this conflict is now positioning themselves to gain maximal advantage before Mr. Trump takes oath in January. So I think the push and pull factors that are operating are all around Mr. Trump, because he has made it very clear that he intends to stop the war as soon as possible. Now, I think everyone now believes that they have to position themselves in a manner that gives them advantages when that situation arises. So, I think President Biden has decided to suddenly give Ukraine permission to launch the missiles. Their anti-personnel mines have also been promised, and they will be delivered. So in that sense, things are because I think Biden believes very strongly that it is important for Ukraine to sustain itself on the battlefield, and therefore on the other hand you have Russians, which also believe that they have momentum on their side, and before Mr. Trump comes in and just asks them to sit at the table, let them also push as far as possible and make gains on the battlefield, so that they will have enough room to maneuver when it comes to negotiations.
Also, I wanted to ask you, how do you think, or will it effectively change anything when Trump takes oath and is in power in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war? Is he in control of how things will play out there?
I think it will change if his argument is that, look, I am not going to support Ukraine. If he makes that argument to Ukraine that you have to come to the negotiating table and figure out a way to end the active phase of this war, because you will not get the kind of support Biden was giving you, then I think Ukraine will have to engage the Russians and come to some sort of an understanding to end not, I think, the larger problem in Europe, but at least this active phase of violence. And that would mean that Ukrainians would be under pressure, because they have been gradually losing territory over the last few weeks, if not months, and Russians have been gaining. So all those gains, where do they solidify? How do they operationalize it on the ground? What kind of a final border comes into place? What kind of a buffer? And what kind of security guarantees are provided to Ukraine? I think that all will be contingent on Mr. Trump now. So I think he does have an enormous advantage in shaping the contours of Russia-Ukraine relationship once he's in office. But I don't think it's going to solve the fundamental problem of the European concern and the European security architecture. But I don't think Mr. Trump's concern is that. I think he would want to show that he delivered on his promise of America not really being interested in these wars in which America doesn't have a direct stake, according to him, and therefore he would want to wind them down.
Will his hands be tied by the establishment, or as people say, the so-called deep state, or will he have that freedom to take that decision?
I think some decisions, if his past is anything to go by, he has taken decisions where, where he has been able to take steps beyond what perhaps we thought would never happen. I think, that, as we were discussing, China is a very good example where everyone thought that, look, China consensus is so solid in the US, it's never going to change, and he did change that assumption, that consensus. So I do think that he has that space to maneuver, at least in the first year or so of his term. But I think it would be decided ultimately by lots of factors on the ground and beyond, and perhaps also to a certain extent how the Europeans feel about it, because there is a lot of concern in Europe about Mr. Trump, perhaps more than in any other part of the world. And that would mean that their security relationship with Russia will also have to be part of this discussion. But I do think that to begin with his views, with Mr. Trump's views already on the table, he will have a great bearing on how this relationship and this conflict pans out.
There's still some time before he actually comes to office and takes his decisions, and how will this war eventually play out, and will this war after 1,000 days come to a halt? Right now the tensions have escalated. Thank you so much, Harsh, for that analysis. So that's all that we have time for on this episode of the Ideas Factory.